Great. Well, look, thank you very much, first of all, for having me. And for those who don't know me, I'm Ross, and I'm the JLL EMEA lead for operational real estate on the value and risk side at JLL. But what we're going to do is we've got a very good panel here who are extinguished in their own right within their own companies. And today we're going to talk all around data. And we'll try and make data a very, topical subject, because I think from our perspective, especially from my point of view, I'm a valuer by background, and I know everything I do is around data. Everything we know lenders do focuses on data. Everything that the investors need to do focuses on data. So we know data, and we're hearing it today as well, is what we need to manage. It's what we need to think about. It's what we need to focus on. We've got various different tools in different companies, and we've got different ways of interpreting data. So clearly data is extremely important. And I heard earlier, decisions, need to be made around data. So what's the problem? Why is data such a difficult one to manage in terms of the industry being able to move forward and connect everything we're trying to do around the very first steps? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open to the panel, and if you can just give very, very brief introduction as you talk about this. But my first question is, what's the problem with data? Why is it not connecting?
Thanks. So hi, everyone. I'm Nagadarshan Suresh. I'm a managing consultant with Guidehouse, and we manage the secretariat for PCAF, and I manage a buildings project for PCAF. So thanks for the question, Ross. So essentially, I think the biggest issue with data is, of course, the availability, in my view. If you have data, you can use data to make meaningful decisions that really help you proceed on your path to sustainability. But the availability of data is a big hindrance in that particular perspective, especially when you look at data related to future forward data, fundamentally. So if you're looking for predictions or forecasts of things to do with buildings or hospitality in general, it's not the easiest type of data to be available, and there are a number of things that go into the assumptions that go into the creation of such data, which is not uniform. So there has to be a level of standardization, and in general, in sustainability, harmonization is one of the things that's really being driven nowadays. So for me, yes. So the availability of high quality, discernible, and dependable data is probably the biggest challenge.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm James Fry, founder of Beyond Apartments and Apart Hotels, a sustainability first operator. I have a slightly different view on data. I think it's very important that we know what we're operating and where we need to go. However, I can't help but feel that people hide behind the word, and they get distracted by the fact that they need to have this huge amount of data that is potentially available to us, but difficult to collect and difficult to know what standards we're collecting that under. We're very much about doing rather than just saying. Ultimately, the data, the important data that we want to get is really how much energy we're using, how much water we're using, how much waste we're generating, how much toxicity we're using within our buildings. We get a bill each month, whether it be at home or in our businesses, that tell us how many kilowatt hours we're using, how many cubic meters of water we're using, how much waste we're sending off to the waste company. So although I maybe don't fully understand the huge complexity of it, I do and can't help believe that we need to do more about doing stuff. And I thought the previous panel was very interesting, because that was very much about the doing side rather than just talking and slightly hiding behind the word data.
Thanks, James. We're an ESG data company. That's the start of this. And we've set out to empower non-public companies, so smaller companies, to deliver, I think Mark has referred to it, financial grade auditable data, or as Corey actually called it earlier on, decision useful comparable data. there's so many decisions need to be made around the sustainability agenda to enable the sustainability agenda. We hear how banks are now, will have to offer more sustainability finance over time. They can only do that on the back of financial grade auditable data. They will lend you money based on a verified profit and loss in the balance sheet. They are now, and we're actually seeing it, interestingly enough, in the Nordics. Now, I think we heard from Thomas this morning how the Nordics are thought leaders around the ESG agenda, but they are integrating ESG KPIs into their credit decision-making process. And they're doing that for two reasons. One, as a bank, there is a premium to be had on their cost of funding by being viewed as a better sustainability banker than their peers. And secondly, they've taken a view that if a company, one of their clients, is managing an ESG agenda better than their peers, they're less risky than their peers. So the two critical things for the credit decision-making process, but ultimately, we all know, it's not until the banks get behind something, change really happens at the pace you're all talking about today, and I've heard up here. So we've set out to empower, not the huge companies, but everybody else to extract, enrich, and deliver that type of data cost effectively. And happy to say James, I think, he's on the journey with us. So I think we've taken all that complexity out of it for you, James. But that's what we're about.
Hi, my name is Young, and I'm CEO of D2O. We've been in business for 25 years, and we have been working with data. We have never lost one single hotel, one single case, because we cannot capture data. But the challenge that people, when they talk about that it's hard to catch data or to capture data, is because you start the opposite end. How do we catch data rather than ask question, what is the application? If you want to start off with saying that I want to improve my bottom line by 2 points, then somehow everything trickle down is very easy to catch it. But if you look at capturing data just to report to the head office as a necessary evil, or just to comply for the environment, for the GSC, for the ESG, then of course, it's just something that you hand it down to the IT guy. And the IT guy, he just doesn't see the application of it. So I think it's not that hard. It's just a mindset. Where do you start? If you want to achieve something, and look, footballs or sports today, it's all about data. It's not just let's go out on the field and play. It's all about breaking down how many, your strikes and your cadence and your heartbeats and everything. And I think hotel need to change that mindset, because we have kind of lost the war against the OTA once. So don't do again with this ESG. All right, thanks.
Hi, I'm David from Invesco. So we're on the investment management side. So look, I guess we are big collectors of data, right? It's important for all of our investors, right? Now, interesting hearing the comments earlier on from about when you go to the US, sort of that kind of comment. But data collection has been a huge thing, but it goes into a lot. The reason we're collecting it is it then goes into GRESB and BREEAM and all of these certifications that are required to make you quote unquote green, right? I think that I would go back to the things that have been mentioned is, going back to James's point, actually as an investor, I want to see people doing stuff to make a difference, right? So you go back to the challenge of data. I think there's a few challenges with it. First of all, you're collecting data that people don't really understand. So intuitively, is the number you collect from the meter a good number or a bad number? I don't know, right? People were mentioning in the last panel, they saved X thousand tons of CO2. Good. But what is that? Is that one tree? Is it a forest? Is it, how do we contextualize the data? And so you have this rush to collect without this actually understanding of why on earth you're collecting it. And I think that is actually one of the biggest challenges of it. We then ask all our people in the business to validate data, And again, if looking at Russell, if Russell says to me the RevPAR, Ross, you said the RevPAR is 150. So the RevPAR of this hotel, we said it was 150. We'd all in this room go, that's bad, right? This is probably 200 plus. It's in, it's a Westin, it's in the City of London, whatever, Marriott are operating it must be awesome, right? So we'd intuitively say that, and we'd look at RGI, right? And what are we looking at on ESG data? We need relative stats, we need it kind of STR benchmarked, whatever it might be. So I think the challenge is making it something that actually you can put context behind, and then you can drive action out of, because we're at the sort of stage where it's still collecting. It's got to be accurate. It's got to be audited. It's got to be all of these things, right? Otherwise, what's the point, right? It's just noise, right? So it's got to be that, and then we've got to take and use stuff out of it.
Great. I mean, look, you've all touched on various different bits there. We've got a confusing situation around data in terms of what data needs to be collected. We've got lots of different regulations. We've got lots of different views in terms of the data that needs to come through. We have regulations and legislations and other things around standardization and how that's going to come through. So we know it's got to be standardized. But then we have the people aspect. That's all well and good up here, but what about the actual implementation so they know what's the purpose, the reason? And the final point, I suppose, is around the validation of the data. How do we know, once that data is collected, that it actually can be validated and used in the proper way? So I suppose, in terms of the next question, how can we as an industry get better around less confusion, better standardization, and improvement in around people generally using it in the right way? A few different sort of points there, but maybe any one of you, if you would like to pick up on that.
Just a short observation on that, and in fact the three students kind of highlighted this. I think we have to translate all of it into financial metrics to begin with. Again, it's back to when the money flows, action will happen. I'm going to save 200 quid a month on the breakfast buffet. Okay, we're going to change the breakfast buffet. I think that's where it has to start. So back to the point, any data we do extract has to be at least of financial grade, and you can compare it to financial data. We'll move on to that. There'll be higher motivation, I'm sure, in the future. But right now, I think if we're able to translate anything into financial metrics.
So it's the financial implication.
I believe so, because people will get behind the financial numbers.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. You turn it into a financial metric, people are instantly. It creates a much clearer incentive. The other bit on the collection side is actually just moving way more to automation, right? So I think across all of our hotels now, hotels are good and bad as an asset class, right? So obviously, they're single tenant. So you compare it with an office or a shopping centre or something, it's actually much easier. And we found actually all of our tenants are actually pretty closely incentivized with collecting the data as well, because they can use it, as you said, to improve their business, right? So there's not actually a big issue. And we have direct feeds, they go into deep key and all this stuff. So all of that process is actually pretty slick now, getting better, right? But you've got to then turn it into something you can action.
But I suppose, sorry, just to interject, that's all well and good, let's say, for a company like yourselves and some of the bigger one. We've heard earlier, we've got, $7.5 trillion worth of potential stranded assets if things don't improve. And so there does seem to be a gap forming of those who know that they can need to collect data, and they're doing so, and those who've yet to even start that journey. Or they think they're going to start the journey, but they don't know how to. And if they do, they're a bit concerned that if they give the wrong information, that's going to be impactful for them if they're trying to get a loan or try to sell their asset, etc. So there does seem to be, a bit of a sort of a gap forming as well. So I don't know, maybe from your side.
Well, I mean, certainly from our side, we use Aidan's platform, and we found that very useful. So rather than have to input data ourselves, it automatically gets extracted from our accounting software. So if we pay for it, it recognizes it. That's our entire business, and it extracts information using AI to determine how many kilowatt hours is being used, and other matrix as well. So I think we're a fairly small company. So I think that platform or others could apply to small companies and large companies as well. It's then obviously coming back to the earlier point of then. I'm not saying data is bad. We all have to have the data, but it really is then what action points are going to be taken. I've gone to far too many conferences where people have talked about how passionate they are about sustainability, how it's everything they think about, and at the end, the person hosting might say, "So what are you actually doing?" And there's complete and utter panic. And often it can be, well, we're monitoring the data. When we know the data, we're going to act on the data. We all know what we have to do. We know if we drive a diesel car, there's a better solution. We know if we have a gas boiler, we know there's a better solution. And I, just again, to come back to the fact that we need to talk more about the action points of the data and what we're going to do to reduce that, rather than just the data per se and the concentration on just the collection of data.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree with the one on financial. Ultimately, what's the financial impact of the data that you're collecting? But also, that coming in there is the emission impact. So you're looking at the energy consumption data in your hotels, but what does it actually mean in terms of emissions? It could completely vary depending on where you are situated, the nature of the grid in your country or in your city, to what extent of green energy is in that grid. So there are a number of components that come into play when you convert your energy information into emissions, and that really is where that translation is very important, and that's something that PCAF does in terms of our emission factors that you can use to do the conversion. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, again, talking about small and large enterprises, in many cases, even getting that basic data might be quite difficult for really, really small buildings, and that I'm assuming that would definitely include hospitality. So when you're in that situation, looking at algorithms, looking at models that help you translate from what you know of the area around you, and then using that information to then estimate something for your building is quite important. And that's why there are these number of digital platforms that are coming in nowadays that I think can be really useful in democratizing the whole process in a way.
Yes, democratizing data, that is the key word. And then that does not only mean that you just distribute the data as is, but you have to make it so it makes sense for all the HOD, head of departments. They need to look at it to understand, okay, what is my goal, how am I pacing, and what is the month-end result will be according to the goal that I need to deliver. And I think that's, if you want that engagement, then you of course need to link that to the incentives. You need to link it to the P&L, because if not, it's just going to be isolated as a one corner of the building that's work with the data, and then the rest of the team, they still make decisions on a daily basis and consume what they used to consume. And we have seen that data. We have seen one thing, just to give you an example, that towers, you introduce green towers, so guests are not using the tower or not want to change the towers every single day. But when we get in and look at the data, we see that the consumption average number of towers per guest is the same before and after the green initiative, despite that they report that they have improved. But the problem is that the infrastructure, they cannot put up a 5-star standard tower as a dirty tower and fold it. So they just take a new tower and hang it up. And so we have to look through the entire logistic and the journey of that data as well. So not just only take the data and report it.
Yeah. Sorry.
I maybe just give a sort of real example. I visited a hotel last week with one of my asset management colleagues, and I think that you do need like a level of understanding of what you're looking at when you're looking at stuff. So we went around the plant room in the hotel, and so I'm relying on my colleague here, right? And he looking at the temperature gauges on the water, and he's saying to me, well, that's 5 degrees too high. And if we lowered that temperature by 5 degrees, he actually said we'd add X points on BREEAM, right? I mean, he actually knew what the implication was of changing something. But it's, we were shown around by technical people who couldn't be bothered to like show us we said, can we see the technical room? And they were like, oh, do we have to? And this is a little bit of the stuff you're trying to get around. So it's all very well going data this, data that, data everything else. You've actually got to go in and you've got to know when you see that it's whatever, I think it was 70 degrees and that was too hot. And again, it would be a regulatory thing, but at 65, it's right. And you're changing that will massively change your energy bill in the hotel, right? That's going to save the tenant money, it's going to save everybody money. But you need actually to be quite knowledgeable to be going round and having to make these observations. Because again, with the data, it's all very well going, oh, we've used this much, right? But we're probably not tracking what temperature the thing's set at, right?
And do you think, I mean, we mentioned about AI, we mentioned about technology, automation, other sort of initiatives, and obviously you've got the people aspect, and I get that, but surely, AI and other sort of tech solutions can help with this, to take a lot of that sort of, I suppose, responsibility away and to be able to pass that information over. So do we think...
It can, but it's got to know it's got to learn, hasn't it? So it can't just magic up the answer, right?
So
maybe it can, maybe I've missed this.
Well, I don't know. I mean, where does technology play a part to this?
I mean, certainly an automation of collection of data, but I'll pass on to people who actually are more knowledgeable.
Yes, AI definitely can help, and technology in general, because when you bring in data on hourly basis, real time, then you start seeing correlation. When you see correlations, that one day you drop, and the correlation have an average correlation, but 0.7 drop to 0.3, and of course you see that something is wrong, and then you can take that as an outlier, and put that as an outlier, and then you can start what we call for seasonal the data, and put it in different categories. So yes, there are methods to do that, and but if you're using monthly aggregated data for reporting purpose and use it as a managerial accounting, then you are not so lucky with the technology cannot do much of that. Mm-hmm. That is just one comment on that. When it comes to average data, it's like, the body temperature, looking at it, 37 degrees Celsius, perfect. But when you look at the body, and half of the body is in the oven and half of the body in the deep freezer. So, so we have to make a difference between the operational data, the managerial accounting, and then the financial accounting for the reporting purpose. Again, back to the application.
But Corey, back to your point this morning, we've got to start somewhere. So there's a broad set of assumptions you can make, so you get everybody on board with the agenda. But there's a responsibility on all of us to improve that data over time. So, for instance, I was talking to Mark this morning. He told me if you stick with the greenhouse gas protocol, you can calculate the carbon emissions associated with a company, and you can get a score of 1, or you can get a score of 6.4, i.e. a multiple of 6.5 times. Just depending, you're within the greenhouse gas protocol. You're just changing some of the assumptions around. So it is incumbent on us to find better data all the time. And at the end of the day, I think you'll hear spend versus activity. Activity data is really important. You're an industry that's blessed with a lot of activity data. You actually have to use it to manage your business and improve your performance. So one of the opportunities, we've met D2O through your organization actually. These guys have activity data. We know by taking activity data and replacing some of the spend assumptions that our platform would make based on looking at invoices, James, that's an improvement. And that improvement will flow all the way through to the cost of financing for the next refit for a building, because you really are talking about actual dollars and cents, or what is it, pounds and pennies? Pounds and pennies. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm just going to say a quick point. Ultimately, as an operator, the holy grail for us is that our PMS, our property management system, speaks to our building management system, so that one can tell the other when a room is occupied, not occupied when it's cleaned. We can then do things like bring down the ambient temperature in a room, so that if it's not occupied, we don't turn off everything, because it's very expensive to completely cool a room and then completely heat it up again, but make it an ambient temperature. Also, AI can help us control how much of the water we heat up, depending upon usage. We might see that actually we thought everyone wanted to shower at 6:30 at night. Actually, AI is telling us it's more like 7:10, so the hot water will start to heat up slightly later and therefore use less energy. So for us, it's integrating the sustainability tools along with the BMS and the PMS systems.
Yeah, I think that the one point that I wanted to make that was not covered is around validation. So AI can play a big role in validating some of our assumptions that are based on EPCs, for example, that have been around for a long time, or on understandings of how much what a particular type of material can emit in terms of carbon emissions. So using AI in such situations can really help you validate, because a lot of these numbers and assumptions might be wrong. Because they've been done over years and things are changing quite a lot. So using AI in a validatory capacity is something that a few platforms use as well, and I think that's quite useful as well in the industry.
So we know there's tech solutions, we know there's different ways of being able to capture data, being able to analyze it. So how do we motivate people to use it or see data in a much better way? Where are we going wrong?
Okay, profit. Ultimately, that's what people want to see. Look, over the last few years, the industry's had some difficulties in terms of the unpredictability of energy costs. Obviously, if you look to control the amount of energy used, generate some of that energy on site, you have more control and less risk. Another big aspect for us has been employment. Getting good employees and retaining those employees. Again, by being more sustainable, by tracking your data, being able to be more transparent, there's definitely an advantage in terms of attracting the best employees. Ultimately, I think it's been touched on today, we know the direction of travel of the world. This isn't going to be sort of less important next year, in 5 years, and 10 years' time. We know that there is a lot of capital coming into this space. So I think that we'll see, advantages in terms of lower exit yields, higher valuations on properties, and that will ultimately drive more people to do more in the sector. But ultimately, as I've learned the hard way, as much as I'm passionate about what I do, I have to bring everything back to profitability.
I'll say something controversial. I actually think the banks are going to help us.
I was going to ask that next question about the lenders.
So, all right.
Yeah,
I really think they will help us. They're now under pressure, severe pressure, to reduce their emissions. There's a regulatory focus on their scope 3 financed emissions. That's all of our emissions, basically. They're using, and the same data that we're talking about to sort of assess our own businesses and properties, they're using that data to basically do a diagnostic on their lending portfolios. So they now have information where they can target the top 20 emitters within the hospitality space, the top 15 within the cement production space. And I've spoken to a good few commercial banking leads, CEOs, CFOs. You're going to see a lot of literally aggressive marketing and targeting of the companies within their portfolios that are contributing most to their emissions problem. And that's a good thing. Now, it's going to start off as a carrot. I think we heard about it, maybe a 20 or a 30 basis points, reduction in APR, in lending rate today. In a not very long period of time, I think that's going to be a stick. They're going to actually start withholding financing unless you get on board, because it's detrimental to them. If they can't be seen as a good sustainability banker, NatWest versus Barclays, NatWest they're seeking a reduced cost in their funding. If they can't achieve that, they will withhold financing. So I think we'll see a lot of help from the banking sector for a profit, I'm sure, but I think they will help.
Yes, increasing application or how people embrace data. I think there's a potential that is untapped in the industry. Is using the real-time data, for instance, employee satisfaction, where they can get, where they like a guest satisfaction, where they can give a feedback right away on the job and after the shift, how happy they are. And we see that the younger companies now, they start doing that. And also, one thing is that the entire industry still today are doing something that is not very employee-friendly. That is one of the most important things for employee when it comes to satisfaction is that how you schedule them. And still today with the forecasting technology, and still we let all the employee wait until Tuesday or Thursday every week until you announce the schedule. That is, we know that next week and the week after, in 3 months, in 6 months, we know that we need at least 80%. So why don't we lock in the names and let them have a predictability of when they work? I think that is something that we can use data for.
David, any other point? No?
Yeah, I think the only thing, it's also about strategic decision making, right? So it's not, which in turn has its implications from financial regulations and the pressure from banks. But ultimately, if you're a builder or a developer or owner, you are looking at data to understand how best to think about your activities in the future. The type of materials that you choose, the type of construction activities that you choose can really inform the level of, for example, embodied carbon within your buildings. And 20 years later, it's important to have that information now to be future-proof from regulations and to know the best way to manage the building into a longer life cycle. So you're not only thinking today, you're thinking of the future and the financial implications that could come in the future due to your choices now.
Okay, great.
Maybe just to build on that point,
yeah.
I think is for me, this good question of how people kind of get involved with ESG more. In our business, it's just an intrinsic part of the business, right? It's, we'll be late. It's what we do, right? In our business, right? So investment managers or asset managers now, next 5 years, an understanding of ESG is a core component of that job. It's not something you can ignore. It's not something you say, oh, there's an ESG team, they do it. You're going to have to be, it's an intrinsic part of the job. And that to me is almost the biggest point, is that ESG has become, it is part of the real estate decision making, right? And it has to be part of it and not just a sideshow. And in the past it was, right? In the past it was like, oh, we'll sort out this, right? And this is a little bit why people don't have a good feel for the data. It's a little bit why it's sort of, but it has to actually become fully embedded in how we make decisions, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
No, great. Well, look, I think we're going to go to some questions. So lots of claims are made on investment grade data. What does this actually mean at ground level? We manage global data for hundreds of portfolios. The data usually sucks. So who would like to take that one? Oh, there you go.
I'm happy to start. I have the microphone still. Who asked the question?
Stand up.
Look, ultimately it will need to be audit grade, right, at some point. And it's a fair point, right? I mean, you actually look at the data and you think, I remember we looked at something in our portfolio, we found an asset that was, effectively unstranded in 2050. It's just because the data was wrong, right? So that, or you find one that there's a whole load of anomalies in the data, and so we've just got to get much better at. This is the collection, the validation. Yeah. It's about automation. It's all the things we discussed, right? And it's a journey to improve it, right?
I mean, a lot of the data we're talking about up until now it's really come from the whole sort of self-certification approach to it. So you're taking data that's come from people, from different systems, but it's generally, here's a spreadsheet, fill it out, so there's no validation. I think to generate financial grade auditable data, you have to go back to the source and create the metric from the source It's got to be validated. It looks very like an audit process. Materiality, testing, all of those things, and no human intervention. Well, you know if there's human intervention, there's evidence of it, and then you got to go back and test it again. But absolutely, but you need to be able to determine if it's happened as well.
Yeah.
So that's how you get good data. And certainly our job, some of our jobs up here, is to make that cost efficient and effective. It's really, really hard if you don't have the technology and the plugins to the data sources. I'm not going to
last point, and then we'll move on to the next question. Go on.
Yes. So I see a larger problem with when the data is not correct. It's not about the collecting the data, but actually you do practice, you do manage the property that way. That means that it's just a reflection of how actually on the ground it is. So it's better that you start a process to improve the practice, then the data will come. But also benchmarking will help. Just remember back in the days, for many years back, or not many years, 30 years back, revenue management came. It took forever for hotel to adopt it. And we did not adopt revenue management before the benchmarker came to them on the market. And that's the same thing with ESG as well. If we can get the benchmarking, and also what we look into not only the lagging indicator, but we look into also the leading indicators. How do we do to produce the end result, the lagging? That is something that we are not looking at today, just looking at the end result. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Energy, water, waste, food waste, etc. is the easy part because it is quantitative. What is your point of view, or how do you address data that is not quantitative, like social impact, social engagement? Who would like to say that?
Look, I have a couple of quick... I'm holding this hot thing. A couple of quick points. I mean, it's everything... We're all talking about EEE is kind of what's driving the agenda. But there are ways, if we look at the S metrics, we look at people particularly, you can apply science to looking at the cost of losing people, the cost of not training people. There's lots of studies out there. So you can, again, in the E metrics, one of them will be cost of losing a person, another will be cost of training a person. But I would argue it is way more expensive to look for a new hire who's got the ESG qualifications than have a training program in-house. It's two very trite, simple examples, but you can apply science and observation to the other metrics as well. And I mean, the benchmarks actually, I know in Britain particularly, some of the government benchmarks around people are all the way down to, they're location-based. It's actually quite a rich data set. And if you study that and you start to measure yourself against it, I'd argue it's pretty powerful.
So there is some data that can still be used to be able to...
It varies by jurisdiction and so on, but certainly in the UK we're finding great data sets around people. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Or you can add ChatGPT.
ChatGPT for everything, yeah. Build it and they will come, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, the social side is a big thing that we're looking at on the investor side. It's much harder to have a direct impact because typically we'd be a landlord and we lease the hotel to an operator, and it's much more in the operator's gift. So you try and embed now S clauses into leases. We've had green clauses.
How do you do that?
Well, we've had green clauses for a while, right? And then I think you'll start to see more coming in on the S side, but that might be that you have clauses that you're putting in. At the beginning, they'll all be very soft, right? So it would be, we want some KPIs on the metrics the hotel's using to drive social engagement. It would be vague to start with, but it's a big area that will need to be improved because it will become an increasing focus. But most of our time is naturally on the E side.
Okay. Right. Any others? Or no? You're okay. We're done. Well, look, thank you very much to the panelists, and really enjoyed that. Thank you. Over to you. Thank you. Right. Cheers. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Thanks. Cheers. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Cheers. No. Thank you.
Great.
Again.
We're getting somewhere. So just
Go on, off to you.
thinking of the S, most of the afternoon is actually looking at the S side. I just make a couple of observations. to Aidan's point, some of this S data is already required in our financial reporting anyway. Gender pay gap, executive pay gap. These are things that are already in there, right? So there's, again, it isn't a big mystery, this. It really isn't. We actually have a lot of this data in our businesses. We're not aware of it for these purposes, and that's why we're not really looking for it when we put this hat on. I want to do a couple of things. Let me ask this question first, if we could, Art, please. So go back to the Mentimeter thing. I just want to see, so we all, I think I'm getting really impressed that we all understand that this thing called data is really important. I'm hoping to ask you guys what you think. So this is not, I'm not asking what you think. I'd love to know what you think other people in your organization think of this kind of data. You with me? So it's not us because we know about it, but we're talking to other people. What do they think of all this? Maybe fluffy or maybe really valuable, I don't know. So I'd love to know what you think other people in your organization think and its importance to the business. Interesting, isn't it? Obviously we need it to flip, but it's really interesting. So if you think about it, I think this key that you've all come back to so many times, which is great, is I think if you link it and integrate it with financial data, non-financial data and financial data, which is what the IFRS is all about, and they are going to go to integrated reporting, they've said that publicly, that's what is going to be the agenda, then this thing will actually flip, because everybody will go, oh, I get it now. So that's in effect what we've said. Okay, one of my jobs is to try and make sense of all this. So this session was basically about, I think you call it strategize, Sophie, so doing, I call it. So Art, if you could just put up, I think there's 2 slides I just want to show you. The first is what we all have mentioned many times. It is an alphabet soup. These acronyms are a nightmare. I can't remember them. They keep introducing new ones, which is even worse. It's a complete disaster. So what I'm going to try and provide is my attempt at the alphabet without the soup, okay? And I'm not going to go very deep into the alphabet. So on the next slide, I'd just like to focus on these things, because I think these are action points that I'd maybe like you to take away. So the first, I'm going to start with B, okay? The point of data, it's completely irrelevant and useless. It's about people and behaviors. That's the point about the data. It's measuring behavior, right? Have I turned the tap on? Have I increased the temperature? Have I left the light on? Whatever it is. Have I abused a colleague? Have I, whatever, okay? So it's about behavior. CapEx, I think Accor Invest, we discovered last year, I think, have this, it's a genius strategy. No CapEx, low CapEx, high CapEx, in that order. And I think, Caroline, I think I'm right in saying you've got a 25% improvement in your carbon reduction, in your carbon emissions, with no CapEx. Behavior, changing behaviors, right? So there's no reason why we can't get started and get going. It doesn't cost anything, we just need to start talking to people. Okay, so that's quite impressive. The social side, DE&I is really important. That is what's coming next on the social side. The SEC have even said, when we get to the next one, if we're still alive, they'll probably go on the human capital side. You guys are looking at the human capital side now. I've bored everybody rigid, and probably will for the rest of my life. This little E after CO2 is incredibly important. All the students are laughing at me. I say this every time. It drives me insane. Carbon is not what we're talking about. We're talking about GHG, greenhouse gases, right? There are 9 of them, 9 major ones. The 3 major ones are carbon dioxide, which is CO2, no E, right? The E includes methane, nitrous oxide, and the others, okay? But they're the 3 big ones. The E basically says equivalent emissions. So it's a bit like in economics, we have a thing called purchasing power parity. You've heard of that? Where you try and equate the cost of living around the world, essentially. It's the same thing here. You're equating the global warming potential, it's called, of these different gases to carbon dioxide. So you're producing an equivalent metric, essentially. So the E is unbelievably important. So if you're buying any data, looking at data, doing anything with data, if it doesn't have the little E, don't even look at it. It's not worth looking at, okay? Because this is not just about carbon dioxide. Let me bring that to life for you. Food waste, Soraya's project. If it were a country, would be the third worst emitter on the planet. Okay, because it's mainly, we shove it in the ground and it's full of methane. Okay, which is much more dangerous than carbon dioxide. Okay, so look for the little e, it's really important. We've spoken a lot about financial risks and opportunities. Don't forget the opportunities. I hope that's gone in today. It's not all bad. This is all good. And lastly, you'll only get there if you go back to the A. And actually, Corey and his mates actually can go, this is good data. Now, data is never going to be perfect. You know, in academia, we work with data. Most of it's incredibly difficult to work with. It's messy. It's awkward. It's never going to be very good. Okay? It's never going to be 100%. Okay? We have colleagues at King's who work at the CERN reactor, which is the most precise and expensive scientific instrument that's ever been built. They cannot get to 100%. They cannot get there. They've got to 99.9 something, right? So the real cynic can go, well, is it 100%? And the answer is no, right? But so what, okay? So I think what we need to accept is this idea that financial data isn't perfect either, by the way. It's all about assumptions and notes. And I decided to put this cost into that bucket. Well, you might disagree. You might put it into that bucket. It's fine. As long as it's written down and I understand what you've done and I can recreate it, it's fine, right? That's what it's about. So we have this phrase, I don't know who said it, but it's a great phrase. I think the important thing is to be roughly right rather than precisely wrong, okay? So 80% confidence in the data is great. That's a good start. Okay, and the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, is the 80% number is quite interesting. So Scope 3, we've heard a lot about that. We'll hear a lot more about it. You will all know about Scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are typically about somewhere between 80 and 90% of most organizations' greenhouse gas emissions, CO2e emissions, right? So 80%, and what's very interesting, there's a new piece of work done by the London Stock Exchange Group because of their Refinitiv Icon data set that they have, or using that data set. And they've discovered that 81% of the 80% comes from the top two Scope 3. There are 15 categories of Scope 3. Okay? The biggest one, no surprise to all of you, would be purchased goods and services, food and beverage being a huge part of it. Right? And whatever the second one is in that particular industry. So yes, Scope 3 is a bit of a nightmare. There's 15 different things, but interestingly, most of it is going to be covered by two. Always look for purchased goods and services and whatever's the next most important. So it's not, we don't have to get to all 15. You know, we don't need to be that precise. Let's start, let's get in. I think Emmanuel, the chair of the ISSB, says, our job is to get everyone into the water, and once everyone's in the water, they'll all start trying to get to the other side. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about it.